The city is still standing. The streets are crowded, the markets loud, the temples busy. From the outside, Rome looks unbreakable, but something is wrong, deeply wrong, and almost no one is willing to say it out loud. The empire isn't collapsing in fire or invasion yet. It's rotting quietly, invisibly, while everyone pretends the machine still works. This is the most dangerous stage of any civilization, when the symbols remain, but the meaning is gone. Rome is still calling itself eternal, even as the foundations begin to crack beneath its feet. And the people living through it believe the future will look exactly like the past, right up until it doesn't. Rome's greatest strength had always been expansion, but expansion created a fatal addiction. Conquest brought wealth, slaves, and prestige, but it also removed the need to innovate. The empire learned to take, not to sustain. Provinces existed to serve Rome, not to grow alongside it. Grain from Egypt, taxes from Gaul, silver from Spain, all flowing toward the center. When the flow slowed, panic followed. Rome had built a system that required constant growth, but the world had limits. Once expansion stalled, the entire structure began feeding on itself. The empire didn't know how to exist without conquest, and no one had a plan for what came next. Inside the city, the population was pacified rather than empowered. Free grain and endless games kept unrest manageable, but they also erased responsibility. Civic duty faded, political participation turned into spectacle. Emperors learned that popularity mattered more than competence. The crowd didn't demand reform, only distraction. While arenas filled, infrastructure aged. While festivals continued, military discipline declined. Rome wasn't collapsing, it was being entertained into weakness, and the longer this worked, the more impossible real reform became. Any leader who tried to fix the system risked rebellion. It was safer to pretend nothing was broken. Power itself became unstable. Emperors no longer ruled by legitimacy, but by survival. The Praetorian Guard, meant to protect the ruler, became kingmakers for hire. Assassination turned into policy. If an emperor displeased the wrong people, his reign ended abruptly. This constant turnover destroyed continuity. Long-term planning vanished. Every ruler focused on staying alive long enough to enjoy power. Laws changed with each regime. Trust evaporated. When leadership becomes temporary, institutions stop functioning. Rome still had authority on paper, but no one believed in it anymore, not even those enforcing it. The economy followed the same path of quiet breakdown. To pay armies and officials, emperors diluted the currency. Coins still looked the same, but they were worth less each year. Inflation spread, prices rose, confidence disappeared. Trade slowed. Farmers abandoned land that no longer benefited them. Tax pressure increased, pushing small landowners into debt and dependency. A middle class that once stabilized the empire slowly vanished. Wealth concentrated at the top, survival anxiety spread below. Rome had mastered taxation, but it taxed itself into paralysis. Meanwhile, the army, the spine of the empire, was changing in dangerous ways. Roman citizens no longer rushed to enlist. Military service became a burden, not an honor. To fill the ranks, Rome hired outsiders. Mercenaries fought not for Rome, but for pay. Their loyalty lasted as long as the money did. Commanders gained more influence than politicians. Armies followed generals instead of the state. Rome still had soldiers, but it no longer controlled what they believed in. An empire that once conquered through unity now depended on rented loyalty. At the borders, pressure mounted. Not sudden invasions, but constant testing. Tribes pushed, retreated, negotiated, waited. They saw what Rome didn't want to admit, that its responses were slower, weaker, inconsistent. Rome began settling entire groups within its borders, promising land and protection it couldn't sustain. These groups were not absorbed, they were parked. They kept their identities, leaders, and grievances. Rome assumed time would Romanize them. Time did the opposite. Authority blurred. Control became theoretical. When the unthinkable finally happened and Rome was sacked, the damage was psychological as much as physical. The city had been violated, and with it, the myth of invincibility. People realized Rome could bleed. Provinces began acting independently, not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. Local rulers protected their own interests. The Western Empire fragmented into regions that still spoke Rome's language, but no longer obeyed its commands. The center issued orders no one enforced. Rome existed, but it no longer ruled. What followed wasn't a single ending, but a long afterlife. Roads remained, laws lingered, titles survived, but coordination was gone. The empire became memory before it became history. Power shifted to local warlords, bishops, and kings who borrowed Rome's symbols to legitimize themselves. Latin survived, even when authority did not. The empire didn't disappear, it dissolved, slowly enough that people adapted without ever noticing the moment of death. This slow fading is why the fall of Rome feels unsettling rather than dramatic. There was no final scene where everyone agreed it was over. One generation still believed Rome would recover. The next lived in a world where Rome was an idea, not a government. Low-poly simplicity captures this perfectly. Figures still standing in familiar shapes, but missing detail, missing depth, missing cohesion. The form survives longer than the function, and by the time the emptiness is obvious, it has already become normal. And then there is the comparison that history rarely emphasizes. The Eastern Empire survived for nearly 1,000 more years. Same Roman law, same imperial titles, same enemies, but different choices. It restructured its economy, centralized power, and adapted its military. This contrast exposes a deeply uncomfortable truth. Rome's fall was not fate. It was a refusal to change quickly enough. Collapse wasn't inevitable. Stagnation was. The most disturbing lesson is not about barbarians or invasions, but denial. Rome saw the warning signs centuries in advance: corruption, inequality, military dependence, loss of civic trust, all visible, all documented, all ignored. Fixing them required sacrifice from those who benefited most from the system, so nothing meaningful was done. The empire chose short-term stability over long-term survival, again and again, until survival was no longer an option. Rome didn't fall in one night. It fell in moments of hesitation, in decisions postponed, in reforms abandoned, in systems that worked just well enough to delay panic. The empire died the way many great powers do, not with collapse, but with continuation, still functioning, still impressive, still ceremonial, long after it stopped being resilient. The ruins we see today are not just remnants of buildings, but evidence of a civilization that outlived its own purpose. And that is why the fall of the Roman Empire still matters, not because it happened, but because of how it happened, quietly, gradually, while everyone insisted the world they knew was permanent. Rome believed it was eternal. History proved that eternity doesn't end in flames. It ends in silence, with the structures still standing and no one left who truly knows how they're supposed to work.